You're watching The Whole Living Show on Trajectory TV.
Operate out of your dreams and your vision and not other people's expectation. Having breast cancer wasn't my choice, but the decision to live healthy so that I could stand before you here today, that's choice. You can choose this very moment to change your life from every perspective.
Tracy Randolph was our speaker. She came back because so many people liked her first presentation. I was one of those people that joined her fitness group, and it made me a better leader.
I grew up in a community, but they had limiting beliefs on what a little black girl could do. Everything that you do in this life is a choice. I choose to live healthy. I choose to change my mindset. I choose to be everything that I dreamed of because I choose faith and I choose me. Live healthy, be everything that you can be today. Choose yourself.
Five years ago, the Power of We Symposium was created to provide a platform for kids from all sectors where they could have a safe and comfortable environment in which to share both their joys and concerns. The Power of We Symposium is proud to have served over 250 kids throughout Romania when we took our mission global back in May of 2023. Now, two teams of amazing volunteers from both the U.S. and Romania embarked on an 8-day Legacy of Hope tour, bringing encouragement and hope to not only the kids of Romania, but also the adults who support them, and also to over 100 kids here in the U.S. who contributed handwritten letters of hope to our Romania mission of 2023. Now, this year, we are proud to provide this opportunity yet again in October, and we are super excited to up our game. New venue, 750 kids this time, and we want to see you there. We're looking forward to meeting you in person at this year's event, which promises, as always, incredible speakers, amazing content, and of course, some of the greatest kids on the planet. So, mark your calendars for October 24th, and we'll see you here in Chicagoland for the Power of We Symposium 2024. This year's theme is Always Together, Never Alone. Tickets are available now on Eventbrite or at powerofwesymposium.com.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of The Whole Living Show. And tonight is a very special show. This is a crossover event with Fem Talk. We have Jeffrey Deskovic back this evening on The Whole Living Show to join me here to do a crossover here. But we're going to get into his compelling story. But I want to tell you about who he is first. Jeffrey Deskovic is an Esquire and MA. He is the founder of Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice, which has freed 14 wrongfully convicted individuals and helped pass 9 laws. And we're going to get into that as soon as we bring him in. But he's an advisory board member of the National Coalition Group. It Could Happen to You. Jeff sits on the Global Advisory Council of Restorative Justice International. He is the co-owner of the Recharge Beyond the Bars re-entry game, which facilitates formerly incarcerated people reconnect let them reconnect with friends and family. Jeff's motivation is he spent 16 years in prison, and we're definitely going to get into his story from age 17 to 32 before being exonerated by DNA. And he's going to give you the details there. A documentary short, Conviction, about his life after exoneration is available on Amazon Prime. So I would implore you to go watch it. But we do not want to delay bringing Jeffrey in. Want to get into this because this is very, very important information for you and your families. So let's bring in Jeff, and I want you to give him a virtual round of applause. Hello, Jeff. Thank you so much for joining me again tonight. As mentioned, we had you on Fem Talk last night, and this is a crossover event this evening, but I wanted to really dive into your story again and give everyone some information about what took place and how you got convicted.
Sure. I was wrongfully convicted of a murder and rape in Peekskill, which was in Westchester County. The wrongful conviction was caused by a coerced false confession, prosecutorial misconduct, fraud by the medical examiner, terrible public defender.
Absolutely. So just talk about the process, because I think this is important. I know I was asking you last night as a mom, what we can tell our children when they're faced with what you went through. And I want you to tell people that story about how you were processed, how they took you through the process to get to that conviction.
Sure. Well, I got on the police radar because in high school I was quiet. I was to myself. I didn't participate in a lot of organized sports, and that made me seem strange to the kids in the school. So in the course of police investigation, they interviewed a lot of students, and some of them told the police they might want to speak with me because I didn't quite fit in. I guess their thought process was that people that are quiet to themselves commit heinous crimes. Yeah. But then an additional factor was that I was a sensitive teenager. This was my first brush with death, and I had an emotional reaction. And the police thought that being that I barely knew the victim, and she was in two of my classes as a freshman, one as a sophomore. I knew her name, she knew mine. That was really the extent of it. We weren't even really on a high-buy basis. So they interpreted that as being suspicious. And then they got a psychological profile from the NYPD, which claimed to have the characteristics of the actual perpetrator, and I had the misfortune of matching that. So that's how I got on their radar. In terms of how they arrested me, so there was a 6 week time period in which half the time they would speak to me like I was a suspect, and the other half the time they would pretend like they needed my help to solve the crime. Prior to being a teenager, I dreamed about being a police officer when I grew up. And so when they, in these interrogations, when they would push too hard and I'd become frightened and want to get away from them, they would switch it up and they would pretend like I was their junior detective helper. They would say things like, the kids won't talk freely around us, but they will around you. Let us know if you hear anything. Stop in from time to time. They'd ask me opinion questions and congratulate me that my opinion was correct. I came from a single parent household. My father was never involved in my life in any aspect, and that intersected with the good cop, bad cop technique where one officer was pretending to be my friend. So I began to look up to him as a father figure. Eventually, they got me to agree to take a lie detector test. They said that they had some new information that they wanted to share with me, and that would allow me to be even more helpful to them. First, though, I would have to take and pass the polygraph. So the next day, rather than report to the school, I went to the police station for the test. My mother and grandmother thought that I was in school, and so therefore they did not call around looking for me. But they drove me from Peekskill at the police station. They drove me 40 minutes away by car to the town of Brewster, which is in Putnam County. So it was 40 minutes away by car, which meant that I wasn't able to leave anymore on my own. I was totally dependent upon the police. The polygraph was a Putnam County Sheriff's investigator. He was dressed like a civilian. He never read me my rights and never had any idea that he was a police officer. I had no attorney present. They didn't give me anything to eat. I didn't understand the big words that were in the 4-page brochure, which explained how the polygraph worked. But I figured, well, I'm there to help the police. So what does it matter? Let's just get on with it. Yeah. And from there, they put me in a small room. He gave me countless cups of coffee to get me nervous. And from there, he attached me to the polygraph machine, and he launched into his third-degree tactics. So he raised his voice at me. He invaded my personal space. He kept asking me the same questions over and over again. And he kept that up for 6.5 to 7 hours.
Yeah.
As each hour passed, my fear increased in proportion to the time. Towards the end, he said, "What do you mean you didn't do it? You just told me through the test result that you did. We just want you to verbally confirm it to us." And that really shot my fear through the roof. And at that point, the officer had been pretending to be my friend. He came in the room and he told me, "Look, they're going to harm you. I've been holding them off. I can't do so any longer. You got to help yourself." Then he said, "Look, just tell them what they want to hear. You can go home afterwards. You're not going to be arrested." Being young, naive, frightened, 16 years old, I wasn't thinking about the long term. I was just concerned with my safety in the moment. I was in fear of my life. The fact that I didn't know where I was and no one else did either loomed large in my mind. I was overwhelmed emotionally and psychologically. Then on one hand, the possibility of harm, and on the other, this false life preserver he threw me. So I took the out which he offered, and I made up a story based on the information that they gave me that day in the 6-week run up to it. By the time it was said and done, I had collapsed on the floor in a fetal position, crying uncontrollably. It wasn't videotaped. There was no audio recording, no signed confession, just their word for it. And when the cops came to court, they left a threat and false promise out of their testimony. I lost the trial, even though the DNA didn't match me. That was through the medical examiner committing fraud, claiming that, he found medical evidence that he forgot to document, that he said showed the victim had been promiscuous, which was a lie. And my lawyer basically didn't defend me, and I was found guilty, and I was given a 15 to life sentence. And as we talked about last night, I lost 7 appeals. I got turned down for parole, but ultimately was exonerated through further DNA testing through the DNA data bank, which identified the actual perpetrator, whose DNA was there because he killed a second victim 3.5 years later.
Yeah, and I wanna just talk about, for the benefit of anyone, not just children, even though here you were underage, so it's enraging to just know that they did this to a child. But I want to talk a little bit about the psychological attack, right, and tactics that they used. I mean, every bit of it was so wrong. Just in terms of when you described how they took you 40 minutes away, noting that you're a child, you won't be able to get back to your home. There's no way for you to leave. Also, just the tactics in terms of leading up to that day and having you trust this one particular cop to coerce you into a confession, right? Just all of those tactics that they use to get you to that point because they wanted you to confess to a crime that you didn't commit. So talk to, the people out there who have faced that or could potentially face that, and what should they do?
Well, I mean, it was, as part of the Reed technique, which is an interrogation method that's prevalent in the U.S. A lot of the tactics the officers employed those against me. I mean, that had to do with putting me in an unfamiliar environment. One where they were in control, cutting me off from the outside, from ignoring denials, from trying to stop me from denying committing the crime, and then continuing on to interrogate me, even though I was asserting my innocence, just pretending like that wasn't even uttered. They have what's called minimization, where they try to make things sound like it's understandable. I would do that, and they suggested a scenario to me, and this was a jealousy thing. Is that what you did? That's what I would have done, and by making things more understandable, and then I mean, who gets punished for something that's understandable, right? I mean, so those are all part of the Reed technique that was employed against me. So very important for parents, and I dare say even aunts and uncles and other people, big brothers, big sisters, and give proper instruction to the children that if the police want to speak with you, you should insist on a lawyer. That is the reason why they read you your Miranda warnings, and anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You don't have to have a lawyer on retainer. If you can't afford an attorney, they will provide one for you. a lot of the innocence of suspects often works against them. They think that, well, if you're innocent, you don't know anything about the crime, then, why shouldn't you waive your rights and speak to the police? Because, what could possibly happen? But actually quite a bit could happen. They could coerce you, and that's what they did. That's what they did to me. People think, well, if I ask for a lawyer, then that's going to make me look guilty. But it's far worse to proceed without an attorney there. And lastly, people think that they can talk their way out of it. I mean, if the police have decided to arrest you, you are not going to be able to talk your way out of it. It doesn't matter what you say. So that's important to convey that. And just the related point, of if the police pull you over, if they stop you, and they ask for your consent to search your trunk, you don't give consent. You verbally say, well, officer, if you decide to search my trunk, you're doing it against my will. I do not consent to you searching my car. You just say that verbally. You don't be crazy and try to stop them physically. Okay,
Sure.
you just verbalize that so that later on you can take it up in court. Coerced false confessions have caused wrongful convictions in 29% of the DNA-proven wrongful convictions. And while adults have given coerced false confessions, particularly vulnerable populations include youth and people with mental health issues.
Yeah. And what protection is there against the youth? Like, shouldn't there be something in place that does not allow the police officers to speak to a youth without an adult present, like an adult that has, some kind of authority or jurisdiction over the child?
Well, there should be, and that's why myself and other advocates in the coalition group, It Could Happen to You, and other groups, I mean, we are pushing for the passage of a bill in New York, and there's similar measures that are considered in other states called the Youth Interrogation Act, which would mandate that 16 and 17-year-olds and kids younger than that would have a non-waivable right to counsel, that they would have to speak to a lawyer for that lawyer to explain to them what their rights are before they could then decide to waive them, keeping in mind that kids often don't understand their rights. I mean, I certainly didn't understand mine. And every time they came to that portion of the Miranda warnings where they said anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law, I never understood what that meant. My mind went to what I saw on TV in different civil court contexts, and I remember thinking to myself, court, well, we're not going to court, but also videotaping interrogations from beginning to end, with right now in New York they are required to videotape custodial interrogations, but there's unfortunately exceptions for sex offenses, homicides, and drug cases. So we're trying to get rid of those exceptions, and we have what's called the Youth Interrogation Act. Excuse me, not that, I said that already. I meant to say the Police Deception Bill, which would ban law enforcement from using deception in interrogations, because that's inherently coercive. Most people don't know that the police are allowed to lie to you when they're questioning you.
Yeah, and there's so much wrong with this whole story, right? Like, talk also about like just the way the community treated it, and how at every level, right, the police officers, the judge, the attorneys, because that's something for people to understand too. Like, when they're all working kind of in lockstep together to convict someone, I guess I'm going to say it this way, right? This is just my opinion, right? But just to pin the murder in this case, right, on someone, right, without really gathering all the evidence, maybe because of the pressure, whatever it was, whatever their reasoning was, but how they work in lockstep, and then what a person can do to try to mitigate some of the I guess the concerns or the convictions that'll come about. Like, how do you mitigate something like that when they're all working together and you don't have the knowledge or the resources to fight that whole system?
Sure. So in terms of working, lockstep, there was a lot of pressure on the police. There was the whole city basically came to a stop. I mean, there was murders were rare, and parents were driving their kids to school and bringing them straight home. And there were periodic town hall meetings held where safety tips and updates and investigation were discussed. So the lockstep comes in at first on the police level. I mean, they coerced the false confession out of me. They fabricated a statement and attributed it to me. They claimed that I said that I didn't know if the perpetrator ejaculated or not, but that word wasn't in my vocabulary as a 16-year-old, and that only appeared in their police reports about the interrogation after the DNA didn't match me. And then after the DNA didn't match me, they went back in the field and they interviewed 17 witnesses who knew the victim in one capacity or another. All of them told the police that, she didn't have a boyfriend. There was no consensual sex. Then on the prosecutorial level, one day before officially getting the DNA test result from the FBI lab, the prosecutor rushed to the grand jury and to indict me, so that this way they didn't have to present the DNA evidence to the grand jury. And then on top of that, the medical examiner had been complained of in neighboring counties by law enforcement, and that information was never turned over, so we weren't able to attack his credibility that way. My own lawyer didn't defend me because he didn't explain to the jury the significance of the DNA not matching me. He never presented my alibi witness. He never cross-examined the medical examiner. He should have never represented me because this other youth that the prosecutor was falsely saying had slept with the victim was represented by another member of that same public defender agency, and specifically by the lawyer who's supposed to be supervising him on my case. So that conflict prevented the defense from asking him to give a DNA sample, prevented us from calling him as a witness. On the judicial level, the judge did not suppress the confession, despite there being a lot of red flags, the coercion around that. And then he didn't dismiss the indictment when the DNA didn't match me. And then also other rulings he made. I mean, the victim's bra and her clothes had been entered into evidence. The jury asked to see the bra, and that's when the judge said, well, that the evidence had been left in the courtroom over the weekend, and the custodians thought it was garbage, and so they threw it out, so it wasn't available. And that was important because the jury asked to see it, and that intersected with one of the statements that they coerced out of me, in which I said that I ripped her bra off. And in some bras, the way that they're made, you can't rip them off. Yeah. So there was all of that collusion, and that collusion continued up through the appellate process to the point that I, lost the 7 appeals, and then it continued at the level of the parole board when, largely because I maintained my innocence rather than expressing remorse and taking responsibility, I was denied parole. So all that before I was, eventually exonerated by the further testing through the data bank, which identified the actual perpetrator who had killed the second victim 3.5 years later.
Yeah. Oh, just the amount of corruption and collusion, like you said, is just, I mean, it happens, right? But it's unbelievable to think that no one stepped up in your defense to say this does not make sense, right?
Right. And I want to say that, the newspapers played a role as well. I mean, newspapers can often, play a role in setting the stage for wrongful convictions to happen. I mean, just about all the coverage in my case, was all from a guilt presumptive oriented perspective. And every time I went to court, it was a major media moment.
Yeah. And it always seems like the reverse, right? It's supposed to be innocent until proven guilty, but it always seems like it's the reverse.
Even though they say it's the other way around, I think that's just on paper. I think in reality, you're guilty until proven innocent. I think that's reflective in the way that newspapers write about things. I think that it's evident that way in terms of how judges typically rule. I don't think the juries, which are made up of just lay people, I don't really think they fully understand what the whole idea of presumption of innocence means. I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there. I think that the jury simply thinks that they have to decide if someone is guilty or not. But before you even get to that point, you're supposed to also, or as part of that, you're supposed to consider whether or not the prosecution has proven it. Do they have proof beyond a reasonable doubt? Because even if you think a defendant's guilty, if you don't think that prosecution has proven it, you're supposed to be found not guilty. I don't think jurors understand that. I don't think that jurors understand the idea that, if someone doesn't take the stand, then that's just because they chose not to. Their lawyer probably advised them not to. It doesn't mean that they're hiding something. And then, so that's another misconcept, the idea that someone's hiding something. And then lastly, I mean, just the common sense thought, right, which is actually wrong-headed. Well, obviously, if you didn't do it, they wouldn't have arrested you for it, right?
Yeah.
So all those concepts are working working like that, and I think that that's also reflective on the appeal process. I mean, the way that appeals are often rubber stamp denied. I mean, whether you have the law and the facts on your side, that only counts for maybe half. The other half is the judge going to give an objective and fair consideration? But the knee-jerk reaction, the rubber stamp deny, to often hide behind proceduralisms or making the most narrowest, deciding cases on the most narrowest of grounds. Yeah. I mean, that's not consistent with a presumption of a presumption of innocence, or even just basic fairness.
Yeah. Oh, and it's so biased, right? Like when you think about how they handle things, it really is. I'm so disturbed by your story, but so inspired also because of just your persistence. So I wanted to talk about that. But before I do, I want to kind of shift gears just a little bit, because this is something that we didn't touch on the other show. I wanted to just ask you, what damage that caused you and your family, because people don't talk about that side of it either. Like you had your mom and your grandmother, and I'm sure a host of other family members. Like, what damage did that cause to you and your family?
Well, my extended family rarely came to see me. There were a couple of sets of aunts and uncles that came, but then they would disappear for 3 years, and they'd visit and disappear for 3 years. So they became strangers, and the overwhelming majority of my extended family never came to see me. My brother, who was 3.5 years younger than me, he came 3 times in 16 years, not at all in the last decade. The kids on the school bus and in the school used to tell him that his brother was a rapist, and they would say other nasty things, and they would try to hit him and stab him with pencils. Eventually he dropped out of school. He turned to drugs and alcohol. He eventually cleaned himself up, but the mannerisms that he acquired while he was engaging in a life of crime to support his drug habit, I mean, still remain with him to this day. He has yet to go back to school. I didn't get to spend what turned out to be my grandmother's last 6 or 7 years. I mean, she passed away while I was wrongfully incarcerated. My mother said that the most difficult part of my being wrongfully imprisoned was that when it was time to go home. I mean, first of all, it was a long trip. It was like 4.5 hours each way, and it was expensive as well. And and that's why in the last 5-6 years, I mean, I was lucky if I saw her once every 6 months. I mean, she developed some problems with her back and with her feet, and things tightened up a little bit financially. But aside from that, the most difficult part was that it was time to go. The visit was up, and she was going home, and she couldn't bring me with her, and she was well aware that the prison was violent. It was dangerous. It was a men's maximum security prison. I mean, I had been charged as an adult, so I was sentenced as an adult and sent to an adult maximum security prison.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So the ripple effect that these wrongful convictions have on family members. I wanted people to understand that part too, because yes, of course, it is your life, and you were wrongfully convicted, and you had to suffer for that. But then there's a ripple effect that happens with family members and people that love you, and people that want to see you out here, like outside of jail, and doing well and flourishing and thriving and wanting so much for you, and having to see you there. So I wanted people to understand that part too, because I wanted people to think about that when they need to fight. If they're ever faced with something like this, when they need to fight and they know that they're innocent. So now I want to shift back into your process in and your persistence to get yourself exonerated, right? So talk about that process, because, commendable, so commendable that you continue to do whatever you could in order to get someone to listen.
So I used to go to the law library and learn the law. I would collect articles about other people who were exonerated, so I could see who helped them, and what route did they take. The court system, I thought, got better as you went higher up, but actually it gets worse. So I went to I lost 7 appeals. I mean, I lost at the appellate division, even though my lawyer made 10 arguments. I mean, the court ruled that my statements were voluntary. They ruled that there was overwhelming evidence of guilt, which doesn't make sense. The DNA didn't match me. The only thing they had is this coerced false confession obtained under highly questionable circumstances. And then they ruled that they looked at my remaining issues and found them to either be without merit or not preserved for review. So they ruled against me 5-0. And then they denied the re-argument motion in one word, denied. The highest court in New York, the Court of Appeals, they declined to give me permission to appeal to them. I lost in federal court because the court clerk gave my lawyer the wrong information pertaining to the filing procedure. So as a result of that, my petition arrived 4 days too late, which former Westchester District Attorney at the time, Janine Pirro, her office took the position that those 4 days were prejudicial to the people and urged the court to simply rule I was late. And that's what happened. And then I challenged that ruling at the Federal Court of Appeals, but got permission to appeal to them on that ground. And but Judge Pooler and future U.S. Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor, they upheld that ruling. They declined. They denied also my re-argument motion, and they declined to give me permission to appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. The Supremes didn't grant me cert. So that's 7 appeals. That's 11 years in. The only way back in the court at that point is if there's either a retroactive change in the law or else you find some previously unknown evidence of innocence, which probably would have resulted in a different outcome. Mm-hmm. So I had no money. My family and I had no money to hire an investigator and attorney. So hence a letter writing campaign. I wrote law firms, faith-based organizations, nonprofit organizations, even people that were not in the legal field. If I could come up in my head with an action that they could take, which could potentially set in motion a chain of events that ultimately culminated into my getting the legal representation that I needed. Mm-hmm. I wrote the letter. I had read that some of the cases that ended in exoneration that, they had engaged in that tactic and that worked. So I wrote letters for 4 years, rarely getting responses. And I mentioned that I got turned down for parole. Ultimately, I was exonerated because one of the letters that I wrote in care of the publishing company to a book author was instead sent by the publishing company to an investigator. When she looked at the DNA test results, she believed in my innocence, and she suggested I write the Innocence Project again. She lobbied them outside the organization. She got several other respected legal entities to lobby them, and I got lucky also that one of the intake workers presented my case 3 times to the attorneys before getting them to agree on the 3rd time. So getting the representation was the key. Second key was Pirro left office. Her successor was willing to let me get the testing. And the third thing is we got lucky that the actual perpetrator's DNA was in the data bank, and it was there because he killed a second victim 3.5 years later after killing the victim in my case, who was a school teacher and had 2 children. Yeah. So I matched him, and then confronted with that evidence, he admitted he was the person who committed the crime. My charges were my conviction was overturned and ultimately dismissed on actual innocence grounds, and he was subsequently arrested and convicted. So that really was one other ripple effect, was that, another person, school teacher Patricia Morrison lost her life, and her kids lost their mother.
Yeah. All because they wanted to just find someone to pin this murder on. And I wanted you to also just kind of touch a little bit on the DNA, because you mentioned earlier in the process that they had already known that your DNA did not match, right? It was just
Correct.
a matter of matching the DNA to the actual perpetrator, to the real perpetrator.
Right. So when the DNA didn't match me, I mean, that should have ended the case at that point.
Yeah.
But they kept going with it. The DNA data bank was created back in 1997, 98. So I was denied further DNA testing several times. So I could have been home in 97 and 98 rather than in 2006. So I would have been home sooner than that instead of being in prison from 17 to 32.
Yeah. Yeah. We're going to take a quick commercial break, but then I want to come back and talk about, how you changed things, how you started this fight, how you became an attorney, and of course, more of the reason why you decided to kind of join the fight. I also wanted to mention that the Innocence Project has been coming up a lot. It's getting some notoriety on reality TV now. There's a lot of reality TV stars, I guess you would say, right, that are backing this particular organization. So I want to come back and just talk about how you turn things around. So let's take this quick commercial break and then we'll be right back. Don't go anywhere, everyone, because there's a lot more to this story. Hello, everyone, and we are back. So we wanted to just speak to Jeff now in regards to how he joined the fight. And also, he brought up a good point as we were going to the commercial break there about why he's not angry. So maybe you want to start with that, because I think that's an interesting point. And it very easily could be, right? Be angry about your situation. So talk about that part first. And how you and I want to bring this up here because this is the Whole Living Show. The fact that you mentioned that you're not angry and how you're living a healthy life moving forward and joining the fight. And so talk a little bit about that.
So my first week I was home, I was angry, and I realized at the end of that week that this is destroying me. So I re-examined that, and I came up with I've lost so much already. Why would I want to, in effect, lose the rest of my life?
Yeah.
I want to enjoy my life as much as I can, and I can't do that while simultaneously being angry or bitter. And less nobly, it's not like if I was angry, I'd be impacting the people that had a hand in what happened to me. I would really be the only loser in that scenario. And the vehicle that allows me to actualize that is I take the energy that I feel, and I channel it into the advocacy work that I do. I do make sense of everything that happened to me in a kaleidoscopic type of way. I am doing the work in the world that I'm supposed to do, and that's how I make sense of what happened. And with that acceptance, I have a sense of inner peace.
Yeah, amen to that. I always say I'm a breast cancer survivor, and I always say that it's the best thing that happened to me, because if it wasn't, I wouldn't have the knowledge and experience to be able to help other people who are suffering with chronic illness, to help them live healthy, because I discovered how to do it through that experience. So I love that you said that, because everything is for a reason, even though at the time that things happen, we don't quite understand. But there would be no Jeffrey Deskovic in this way to come and do this fight for other people who are wrongfully convicted, right? If you had not gone through that experience. So, your impact is supposed to be so much greater, which is happening right now, right? So I love that. I love that you said that. And that's what makes the world a better place. And that's what you are doing. So talk about now what you're doing through your foundation. And the 14, there was 14 people that you've had freed, right? Because of the work that you've been doing. So talk about that. Talk about that.
Sure. So when I was released, I spoke. I did like an off the cuff, impromptu 2.5 hour speech at the press conference. Everything I had ever wanted to say, but could never get anyone to hear me. Here, all came out, and just as I thought I was wrapping up, another topic occurred to me, and then another topic did. So a light bulb went off at that point in my head, and I decided, that I wanted to do advocacy work. And I also remembered, I remember thinking to myself, you were very critical of other people when they would be exonerated to get their initial 5 minutes of fame, and then they disappear. You'd never hear anything about them. Why didn't they try to keep the publicity going, try to help the rest of us, even if it's just on the level of just general awareness? So now that you're unexpected out here, you do it. Show them how it's done. So I kind of drafted myself. So in my first 5 years, I was an individual advocate. So I was speaking, I was trading privacy for awareness by doing media and ultimately new media interviews. I was regularly meeting with elected officials, and I became a weekly columnist at a weekly newspaper, got a scholarship from Mercy College to finish the bachelor's degree. Didn't get into law school, and then decided to get a master's degree in criminal justice. My thesis is written on wrongful conviction, cause, and reform, because I thought that the additional credential would allow me to be a more effective advocate. And after 5 years, I was finally financially compensated. So I used some of the money, 7 figures of it, to start the organization, to continue the work that I was doing individually, but to go to the next level, to be able to try to free other people and keep pushing for the policy changes. So we have had the results that you mentioned. And at some point, I became not satisfied with sitting in the front row of the courtroom. I wanted to be able to sit at the defense table. I wanted to represent some of the clients. I wanted to make some of the arguments, and I made a second stab at getting into law school. And this time I got in, and I'm an attorney now, and that was all in pursuit of the dream of exonerating others as a lawyer. That dream took a major step towards reality a couple of years ago, where as co-counsel to lead attorney Oscar Michelin, we overturned Andre Brown's conviction, who had been in for 23 years. So currently the foundation is working on freeing 13 people. I'm co-counsel in 9 of those cases, and the other 4 are just foundation cases that I'm not an attorney in. And we're pushing policy in New York, Pennsylvania, and California. I already referenced the legislation in terms of the false confession stuff. That's the main things we're pushing in New York. In Pennsylvania, which is a border state to New York, they are one of 12 states that currently does not compensate exonerees. So we're working on passing compensation there. We've gotten a bill introduced on both the Senate and the Assembly side. So we're going to keep building support for that to try to pass that. And in California, we are building support for the Commission on Prosecutor Conduct, so independent oversight board that could investigate allegations of prosecutorial misconduct, to give people that have been wronged by misconduct a place to go for redress. And we hope that it would have a deterrent effect that, of course, would mirror the bill we passed in New York. So, that was with the coalition group. It could happen to you. We have our Pennsylvania chapter. Pennsylvania could happen to you, and California could happen to you. So me and the founder of that coalition and one other person were common to all 3 groups, and the rest of them are made up of stakeholders that live in that particular state.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Talk to about why having funds set up for people that have been exonerated, why that's important, because you talked yesterday about the difficulties of now transitioning back into society.
It's an important tool in putting your life back together again. You're starting over quite literally with nothing. I mean, my first 5 years, because it took me 5 years to get any compensation, it was extremely difficult. I was always passed over for gainful employment, so I lacked stability of housing. My car stayed parked for the most part, and I was a couple of weeks away from the homeless shelter. So I see the compensation as helping with that, and that allowed me to go to law school, and I was able to pay off my student debt for the getting the master's degree. But also, when people are exonerated, there's a slew of psychological after effects. So, it's common to have PTSD, panic attacks, anxiety, altered personality, feeling of processing things at a slower speed, a feeling of having been frozen in time. So I was released when I was 32. I felt like I was 17. So sometimes the after effects can be so debilitating, it's not possible to immediately go to work. And then in addition to that, I lacked job experience, and it seemed like all the employers wanted somebody that could hit the job, who could hit the ground running. Technology was different. So
Yeah.
cell phones, GPS, internet hadn't been created before. So there was, that learning curve, factoring that into the job aspect of it. I feel strongly that about the reentry assistance, in addition to the compensation, housing, doctor, dental, mental health, access to public transportation, job training, job placement, classes on technology. All that should be provided on day one, when
Yeah.
most of what goes on now, which is just releasing people with nothing.
Nothing. Yeah, absolutely. Because it's like you have to speed up, right? You have to learn now faster than anybody else out there, because now you're trying to catch up to all of the changes that have happened while you were incarcerated. Um, oh my gosh, I wanted to also ask you, just to backtrack a little bit, because I know this is a question that someone wanted to ask yesterday. Did anyone in that situation, police officers, judge, prosecutors, was anyone reprimanded for your case?
No, the short answer is no.
Wow.
In fact, the police lieutenant that oversaw everything went on later to become the police chief, based in part on my case. But they didn't face any criminal charges. Although I filed civil rights lawsuit, the entity that ultimately paid the settlements and the judgment that I won were the municipalities, the entities that they worked for, not they themselves personally. And they didn't face any professional consequences either. The most that could be said was there were a couple of indirect outcomes, fallout, which was that 2 weeks before I emerged, the prosecutor suddenly retired and ran to Florida just to get away from the media storm. And once I filed the civil rights lawsuit, the medical examiner suddenly retired. But beyond just consequences, nobody. I didn't get an apology from anybody involved. I mean, I got a symbolic apology from the prosecutor, but that was not their counterpart that prosecuted me. I got a symbolic apology from the judge, but that wasn't the one that presided over that kangaroo court in which I was convicted. The only person that apologized was the actual perpetrator, and even he managed to dilute that to the extent that would have any impact at all. I mean, because he managed to mix a lie with his apology. He claimed that if he knew that I was in prison for his crime, that he would have come forward and said something. But it was such a high-profile case. Peekskill was such a small community, 25,000 people. Everyone was talking about it. There's no way he could have not known. And I later learned, after I was released, I met somebody that used to get high with him, and she said that that they talked about the case sometime. I mean, he never said anything indicating that he was the party that committed the offense, but they talked about the case. They talked about, the trial and me. So I knew that he knew.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, wow. Boy, there's so much. So now, with what you're working on now, I have a question for you in regards to someone who, because just knowing someone who we feel like has been wrongfully accused, they have not been convicted. So I want to ask you, what measures should they take before they even get to like the trial? What measures can they take to try to prove their innocence?
So they should, they should immediately try to think about, where were they, who were they with, did you buy anything with something that, let's say, a credit card or a debit card, something that would lead a record. I mean, look, that's very hard because most of the time, that the day a crime happened doesn't really mean anything to you if you didn't commit, unless there was something extraordinary that happened. I mean, I can't tell you where I was a year ago. on this date. But if there's that, or if there's any evidence in your behalf, you definitely would want to bring it to the attention of your attorney, and to make sure that they go and speak. So I told to that person, like I told my lawyer, my alibi, who my alibi was, where I was, what I was doing, who I was doing it with, but I didn't follow up to make sure the lawyer spoke to the alibi. I really wasn't on top of my lawyer to find out, what is your strategy? What is your theory of the case? What's my defense going to be? How are you going to deal with this witness? Why are you going to deal with that witness? So I think that don't take a laid back approach. You got to take a proactive approach and stay on top of your lawyer and check in. And this is not the pest gets somebody angry. This is the squeaky wheel gets oiled.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's very important. And I would encourage people, go to the law library, learn about the law. We're in the information age. So it's important to, learn the law as much as you can so that you can proactively participate in your defense. So those would be things that I would encourage people to do. And in terms of, when people are on the back end of that, if somebody is already wrongfully imprisoned, I would encourage them, and friends and family can repeat this also. Look, I would encourage. Look, you don't give up. Go to the law library, learn the law, collect articles about people that were exonerated, and study how they were exonerated. Use as motivation. There's a lot of books about wrongful conviction, both individual cases and even books that are about the causes of it, which cover cases in the course of that. But that's more to illustrate points. But you can purchase books and send those to people. Stay away from the prison politics. Focus on overturning your conviction and regaining your freedom. If you do find new evidence, don't waste it. Don't waste it by filing something pro se, which means on your own. Yeah, we've all heard amazing stories of people who wrote their own motion and they won, but that's few and far between. The overwhelming majority of people, that doesn't happen like that for them. I mean, so the courts are very hostile to pro se litigation, and those things are often denied as soon as they arrive, and you're creating more of a procedural thicket for any lawyer that you may end up with in the future. I mean, there's cases that the foundation has had to walk away from where we were convinced the person was innocent, but there was simply nowhere else left to go. The legal arguments were over. There was no more new evidence to find. It had been found. It had been argued pro se, but it not argued the right way, and it really wasn't given, a proper consideration.
Wow.
That would be something else. And write short letters. The more you write looking for help, the longer the letter is, okay, the less likely it is anybody's going to read it. And the more you send, people think, well, I'll just bombard and send all the legal documents and being transparent. No, the more documents you send, the less likely anyone's going to read it. My name is, I was wrongfully convicted of, I was sentenced to, the evidence against me was, this is the flaws in the evidence. Mention the top 2 or 3 facts in the record that suggests innocence. If there's any directions to go in terms of finding new evidence, you would suggest that. Next thing, the reason I'm writing you is because I'm asking you to consider taking my case pro bono. I don't have any money. I can prove what I'm saying. I have legal documents, but out of respect for your time, I'm not sending it right now. I'll wait till I hear from you. So I'm going to decide to take your case based on one letter. Okay. All you want to have happen is people to think to themselves, well, yes, if that's true, I can see how this person could be innocent. Let me hear a little bit more about it. So cases earn time over time.
Sure. Wow. So I want to make sure that before we go here, I want to make sure that we definitely share the link for the foundation. I know that the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice is looking for at least, right, but more. We want to flood this, right?
Yes.
At least 25,000 people to I'm going to say subscribe to $3 per month, right? And this can help free someone who has been wrongfully convicted. And if you are out there and you or a family member has an issue or a concern, I suggest you go to the foundation website, take a look. Maybe you contact the foundation to see what information you can get in order to help your case. But I so appreciate you for sharing your story, for being here. I appreciate you even more, and commend you for your persistence and your determination in helping other people, and turning this around and making the impact to help get people freed, just like yourself. So I commend you for that, Jeffrey, and I thank you so much. If there is anything else that you need to share at any time that you want to come back, this is always open to you, because it's important that we get the message out there that we don't have these things happening to innocent people. We want to minimize the amount of innocent people that are incarcerated for something that they did not do. So I appreciate you. Everybody here, just look at that link again, visit the website, get the information, subscribe, and donate towards this cause.
Thank you very much. Look, if both political parties could raise hundreds of millions of dollars through what they refer to as small dollar donations, why not to free innocent people who would miss $3 to $5 a month, and yet, that would give us close to $1 million, so we could work on freeing even more people. How? It's not that it would suddenly increase our dedication. It's that it would increase our bandwidth. We would be able to get additional attorneys, investigators, paralegals, other essential personnel. I would like one day to have a chapter of the foundation in each state and ultimately in each country, because I really see this as a worldwide issue. And countries where we don't hear about people being wrongfully convicted, it's because they're not being exonerated. It's not because the injustices aren't happening. But of course, that will be when we get the public support that we need. So, so beyond the Patreon link, I mean, if you work at a corporation and you do corporate philanthropy, just put us on their radar. If there's people that of capacity, again, put us on their radar. If you're a celebrity or you otherwise have a large public platform, I mean, you certainly could be of assistance to us in terms of just referencing the organization, encouraging your fan base to donate to us. So however it is, you've got a public platform. You can use your voice, use the tools, use the ways that's open to you to contribute in whatever way that you can.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Amen. So Jeffrey said it best. We're going to close out the show, everybody. We appreciate you here. Make sure that you tune in again, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time next week, and make sure that you visit the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice, and we will see you again next week. Thank you so much.